Good morning, everyone. I'm going to have to lean over to make this audible for you guys. My name is Elizabeth Hazel, and I am the philanthropy lead at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, which means I ask people for money all day. I would like to acknowledge the peoples and the land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and that we are guests conducting work here today. So we are very grateful to be here and thank them. I am going to introduce the first two speakers, and then I'll come back up and introduce our third speaker. We have Ray Burke from Halifax with the Society of St. Vincent de Paul with the local council there in Halifax, and he's been with them for about 10 years. And then we have Philippe Blain, who is from Ottawa and the National Council for the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. We didn't expect this many people, to be honest. We're very happy to see you all. We're also really thrilled to be here talking after Guy's speech, because the society, and I'll give it a bit of an overview as to what the society is, because a lot of you, I'm guessing, don't really know who we are and what we do. We like to say we are the best kept secret in poverty fighting. We deliver a lot of impact, but nobody really knows about it. So we'll just, and really the connection to Guy's speech is our logo is serving in hope. And you heard the word hope, I don't know how many times in that speech. I don't know how many of you cried, but I had a little bit of things in my eyes I had to take care of, and it's really hard to follow that. But we'll do our best we can. In a very high level summary of what the Society of St. Vincent de Paul is, we are an international organization, and we're present in 150 plus countries. Here in Canada, we've been here for almost 180 years, and wherever you are, we are. We have 800 plus local groups across Canada. Some as few as two, others, much bigger groups, and certainly in Halifax there's a lot of people. In Toronto there's a lot of people. So we are unique in the sense that we fight poverty in each community in the way it appears. So we are we prevent homelessness by dealing with providing food vouchers, rental support. We also work, and some of you are lucky enough to be in areas in which we have thrift stores. This may be the only way you know since Society of St. Vincent de Paul. There are 3 here in Ottawa. There's a bunch across there's about 67 last count of our stores across the country. And our thrift stores are truly nonprofit. All profits, all proceeds that go that come out of those stores go back to your community and help others in the community. We are 96% volunteers organization, 14,000 the last count last year, giving over 1.3 million hours of their time every year. We also address and deal with homelessness where it happens. We have outreach efforts. Specifically, Windsor is an extremely big group that works I see some people nodding. So Windsor does amazing work at doing outreach in the streets. But we also do shelters. We have food banks. We have I had to figure out my numbers again. We have 137 food banks across the country. So again, you might not have heard what we do, but the people that benefit from our support certainly do appreciate it, and they realize the difference we make. So surviving, and the thrift stores are also a big help in our support or help to survive homelessness, because we do vouchers for those who need it, providing clothing, furniture, and other essential items of that nature. The reason we're talking here today is about our history in housing. And housing has been in existence in this organization since the 70s. Started in Ontario and Toronto. We currently have 9 buildings in Toronto, helping for all sorts of groups, including, as you see here, women at risk, single mothers, older population. We have emergency shelters. We have one in Halifax. And we have, so we've got 73-unit apartments. We do a lot of services in Victoria, for example. It's a massive Society of St. Vincent de Paul group that actually provides health support and mental health efforts, etc. The reason we're here today, though, is what's highlighted in yellow here, the 38-unit home for homeless seniors. And that's, my friend Ray here will be taking over and telling you a little bit more about what that program is about and the trauma-induced design that's built into it.
Okay, I need my glasses, folks. Getting old. I'm Ray, by the way, again from Halifax, and very pleased to be with you today. And yes, Guy is a hard act to follow, that's for sure. Why we're going to talk to you today about trauma-informed design is through lived experience, because as Philip has just alluded to, we're in the process of building a 38-unit, deeply affordable, permanent housing project in Halifax, downtown Halifax. And this is something new for us in the Maritimes. It's the first of its kind. So we actually made sure that it was funded. We got the funding through the Rapid Housing Initiative, and there's provincial funding going into it as well. We have the operational funding secured. And our commitment to this project is for 25 years, and I guess I should go to the slide. That makes sense. Whoops, sorry. There we go. So it gives you an idea of a schematic. Oh, sorry. Yeah. It gives you an idea of the schematic of what the building looks like. So again, there's going to be 38 private units, each with their own bathroom, living room, and kitchens. 5 of those will be one bedroom. 33 of those will be studio apartments. 25% will be accessible units. There's 25% are for women in shelters, and the demographic we're targeting is 55, 50 plus demographic, which we think is an underserved demographic for the homeless folks. We're getting the residents, they'll be coming off the by name list in Halifax, which currently stands at about 1,200 people, and of course, like everywhere else, it's going up rather than going down. So although this isn't a huge number, we feel it's worthwhile because obviously it's 38 fewer people that would be living in tents or living in underpasses. So we're extremely proud of this building. Just to segue into why we're talking about trauma-informed design is because we hope that the presentation will provide a helpful guide to folks designing spaces and developing greater awareness and empathy around what the environment plays, the role the environment plays. It's not a central role, but it's a significant role in healing resilience and joy for residents that will be moving in. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what trauma-informed design is, it is basically, the construct is around 4 different concepts. It's about safety and trust, community and collaboration, choice and empowerment, and beauty and joy. The initialization of these techniques not only incorporate, but should focus on and become an integral part of the design. What happened in our particular situation with regards to Ozanam Place is that we weren't initially aware that these techniques were even available, and this is something that we should consider in the design and speaking with architects and our construction folks. So the design was already completed, so we had to go back and we had to retroactively, once we learned about the impact and how significant this is to folks that are coming in off the street, and we didn't want to re-traumatize them because certain building designs will do that and make it very difficult for them to adjust from homelessness to housed. So specifically with safety and trust, it's a housing design that will create a sense of safety and trust, as I said, through spaces, services, and such things as acoustics, color, wall color, that sort of thing. With regard to community and collaboration, The goal is to build a housing community and collaborate with that community by cultivating a social cohesiveness with different spaces and services. We need to give the residents a sense of choice and empowerment because, as Guy very distinctly articulated this morning during his speech, a lot of his life experiences were happened because he didn't feel like he had any choice or any power in what was happening to him. So what you want to do is sort of minimize what a continuation of that by giving residents an offer, offering them options of space and services, which will let them make choices to meet their own individual needs. And of course, you want to include beauty and joy. You want artwork. You want spaces that are conducive to individual and group socializing, to nurture growth and pride and well-being of the individuals that are going to be moving in as residents. So trauma-informed design, actually, to give you a bit of a background, it really stems from trauma-informed care, and that's where the theory came from and the philosophy that this was an important thing to do and to consider when you're building permanent supportive housing. Trauma is actually quite common. Most of us, it's been estimated that about 70% have or will experience trauma in our lifetime. Most of us, however, are able to deal with that and move on, but that's not necessarily the case with people that are unhoused. So for them, it would have a far more greater impact and by triggering bodily responses and negative responses to their environment. Oh, it's not visible. Okay, great. So the framework is basically all centered around safety when we're talking about using this particular technique. And when we're talking about, there's 4 components around safety. Whoops, I've lost my page here. Right, so there's 4 critical components around, besides safety, and the 3 C's. It's commitment, it's comfort, and choice. Now, when we're specifically talking about safety, as you can see from the framework, that's the graphic that's dialogued up there, it includes actual and perceived safety by the individual. So design elements can certainly play an important role there around safety. It's about physical safety, it's about well-being, and it's about the security of space and belonging. It can also be psychological, obviously, peace of mind, et cetera, et cetera. Connection, there's some different elements with regard to connection when you're thinking about design techniques. And it's important because there's some different layers of connection that individuals will have. The residents, of course, need to connect with themselves, their mind, their body. They need to connect with other residents. They need to connect with staff and service providers that are in the building. And also the surrounding neighborhood and the building itself. I'm just going to grab a drink of water here. Comfort is also an important factor, and that allows the individual to be at ease physically, psychologically, and socially within the spaces. For personal and collective comfort, these things can be visual, sounds, ventilation, air quality, temperature comfort, airflow, lights, and certainly acoustics, the noise that they hear or they don't hear. Also, design techniques include the fact that they should be aesthetically pleasing and spark joy, as we alluded to before. And you sort of, the suggestion is to go with higher quality furniture because it gives an individual a sense of worth, self-worth, as opposed to going with things that are easily replaceable or plastics, that sort of thing. And also a sense of permanency, which enhances the dignity and self-worth of the individual, which is really, to a large degree, what we're trying to do here with trauma-informed design. Also, you've got to give the individual choice. It's important that you allow the person to make decisions about their environment. These can be such things as dimmer switches, window shades, lighting, and they need to have a choice for social engagement. You know, there'll be times when they want to be alone, when they want to be very solitary, and there'll also be times when they want to meet in a group setting. Design should be adaptable enough to allow both of those things to happen. And settings should be varied with seating arrangements, et cetera, et cetera. Multiple pathways, meaning that there are certainly more than one entrance and exit to common rooms, that type of thing. You don't want to have bottlenecks where people feel they're going to be trapped in a certain area. Okay, so specifically, when we're talking about how we adapted these concepts to what we're doing in Halifax at the Ozanam Place, let's walk you through some various spaces. And if you're going to be involved in this type of initiative, which we think you should be because of the impact it has on those you are serving, then it serves you to know where the impacts are, what rooms specifically they could be applied to, et cetera, et cetera. Just a second here. So this is not going next. There we go. Okay, great. So some design do's and don'ts specifically. So when we're talking about homes or apartments, you can see clearly on the slide presentation there's some specifics, do's and don'ts. In addition to those do's, do make sure that specifically this is for their individual apartment units, do make sure that they have control of their temperatures within the unit. For instance, heating and cooling. But of course, that would be within a range. I mean, you don't want them turning the heat up to 120, and you don't want them it being so cold that it's going to disrupt the overall system, your heating and cooling system. But they should be able to have an opportunity for their own individual comfort. You should allow for individual expression within the unit, of course. So this is shelving that's built in so they can put personal items in, feel more secure. It's a place they call their own. They can take pride in it. The other thing is as well, there's been some recommendations that even in the hallways that they can individualize the entrance to their apartments, which again makes them have a greater sense of dignity and self-worth. We're also recommending that they have peepholes for security so they can see folks that are coming and going into their apartments. They need to know that they have control there. Make sure that there is always enough lighting. That tends to be a problem, particularly with the interior of some of the units. So when we're talking about the laundry room, this is an area that really was significant for us, and I'll show you why in the next slide, and it really caused us to have to do a total revamp or redesign of our initial design of the building. But in the laundry room, you want to make sure that, as well as what's indicated on the slide that you can see, some additional things would be they have to have the ability, even in the laundry room, to make sure that there's they can experience some privacy, that there's adequate ventilation, and it's also something that would be quite often overlooked is like instructions or frequently asked questions with regards even how to use the laundry, so they don't feel incompetent or inadequate. So I think it's recommended that that's done. Some useful guidance. One of the things you don't want to have in the laundry room is no views, no sight lines, and of course, as I just said, no written guidance. One of the things that's overlooked and can be very uncomfortable and trigger negative responses by residents is something as small as having a floor that is sticky from soap or residue or whatever. This can trigger outdoor responses from outdoor experiences that they've had when they were living in the rough. or they were homeless. So it becomes as detailed as the type of flooring you may want to use. Now, what I should also say is that it's important when you are discussing the techniques and the various designs that can be incorporated to minimize trauma with your residents, that they play a significant part in this. It's important that they are there. It gives them a sense of empowerment and control and input into the situation. And you should realize when you're thinking about this, that the needs of the residents will change over time. It's an ebb and flow. It's flexible, but there's some basic tenets or some basic concepts you should be using from the beginning, and these are sort of the ones that I'm focusing on. Now, with regards to the laundry room, we at Ozanam Place, as I was alluding to before, realized that we were making a big mistake in the setup of the laundry room where we had it. So, as you can see from the slide, we completely relocated it. The red arrow indicates where it was and then where we moved it to. And we did this because we knew we were not meeting even the basic criteria of trauma-informed design. We relocated it because it was a closed, dark space with not great lighting. There wasn't a sense of security, and there wasn't enough seating. There wasn't flexibility in the use of the space. So what we did do, and we were able to do this obviously before the actual build started, we relocated it. We created a glass wall which looked out into the hall, which gave them a sense of openness and open sight lines, which is critically important. We also had better sight lines, as I alluded to. The furniture that we're putting in will be more flexible. You could also use the rooms while they're waiting, while they're waiting for the laundry to be done. And often, folks that have been traumatized, possessions to them are extremely important, and they don't trust other individuals that are in their social circle. So they would want to be able to monitor their laundry, all facets, the washing and the drying. So while they're doing that, it's important with this type of design that they have an opportunity, if they so choose, to socialize. So a card table or a games table in the laundry room would allow them to do something productive or something that's fun while they're waiting for their laundry to be completed. You need appropriate color palettes, open sight lines. As I said, we had bigger square footage than what we initially thought we would use, more natural light, more seating, and it has a direct connection to the community room, which is a common space. So that's important as well. All right. What about some do's and don'ts in some other areas of the building? How am I doing for time here?
You're on fire, go.
Okay. All right, I've heard that before. Maybe not in a good way. So let's talk a bit about multi-purpose rooms and community rooms. Well, some additions again to what's already that you see on the screen would be multiple access points, group and individual seating, natural ventilation, allow residents to bring it to life by enabling them to introduce activities of their own to contribute to that space. Allow a community artistic expression. So if you have painters or folks that do whatever in the building, which may be part of the ability that they have in the common rooms to do activities, you would want to display those things because it'll give them more of a sense of purpose and a sense that it's home. And make sure that it has views and access to the outdoors, if you can, for these common and multi-purpose spaces. Don't neglect looking after activities and programs. Make sure you have suggestions and that folks are encouraged and given opportunities to engage with other residents in the building. Make sure that it is, the furniture is not inaccessible. Again, that it can be moved, but that it's functional, but it also looks good. Make sure you don't have a single access point to these common areas. And make sure, of course, that you can see the outdoors, that there's visibility there, and there's also daylight spaces. What about staff working spaces and private offices? Those are important too, because individuals will have one-on-one meetings with folks that are providing services in the building. And I should mention as well that although we will operate the building, and we've built the building, and we have a commitment for 25 years for this particular project in Halifax, the actual day-to-day counseling, wraparound services, et cetera, will be all covered. We don't have expertise in this as Vincentians and as members of St. Vincent de Paul. So it'll be provided by the North End Community Health Center, and they're experienced service providers in Halifax. They already have several facilities. So they'll be staffing it, they'll be providing the resources, et cetera, 24/7. And we do have, I should mention that we have a commitment for operating expenses to be covered by the provincial government, and we're estimating that the operating expenses for this building will be between $1 and $1.5 million annually. So we're betting on the fact, we have a provincial election that was just called, by the way. We're going to the polls the end of this month. But we are counting on the fact that because this is rare in Halifax, where a nonprofit has secured the funding and has built it, we did everything with regards to the construction and architects and secured the service provider, that we're betting on the fact that it would not be in the best interest of any government, even when political parties do change hands because of elections, not to support the project. It would be very poor PR. And the government in Nova Scotia, I'm not sure where it is, how it works in the rest of the provinces, of course. This is, the area where I live and my expertise. But they would be remiss in not providing continued service. And also what it does is, of course, we know in Nova Scotia that the government is not interested in building these type of projects. They will assist with the financing, but they don't want to staff them, they don't want to run them, they don't want anything to do with them. But they want to be seen as contributors to providing a solution to this crisis that we find ourselves in, right? So I think you'll find by and large, at least in Nova Scotia, we're hoping that we're setting an example with this project. I'm riffing a bit here. This obviously isn't on the slide, but it's important that you have some background information. That we've set an example for other nonprofits within the province of what can be done. I mean, we certainly weren't experts in this. And as you can tell, I'm certainly not an expert in trauma-informed design. It's only through the learned experience of having gone through the design process and having the ability, luckily, to make changes before it was too late, that we will provide the best permanent housing we can for the individuals that are coming in that are currently homeless. The other thing I wanted to say about that was, gosh, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so we're, let's talk about slide number 11 then, and private offices, work staff. It's important that we sort of follow the same principles there. So it's light filled, naturally ventilated, lightweight movable furniture. Again, I want to make sure you don't forget about the acoustical separation. It's important for the individual apartments and also in private meeting spaces like in offices when they're having one-on-ones with support services, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing that tends to be forgotten is, often, or in many cases, the tenants won't have the ability to store their belongings, or they'll gain belongings as they live there on a permanent basis. So individual lockers need to be available for them that they can access in the lower level of a building, much as any apartment building would have, right? And these folks will be signing leases. And one thing I didn't mention is the rent geared rate will be a maximum of 30% of whatever their income is. So if they are on income assistance in Nova Scotia, it's extremely low, around $600 or $700 a month. The most they would pay for rent would be about $200 a month for us. And that's obviously why there needs to be a significant input on the government level to make sure the building keeps operating, because it would rent will be not certainly covering by a large degree everything that needs to be done with the building. Some don'ts for your private office spaces is, of course, don't make them windowless, don't have harsh fluorescent lighting overhead, make it warm and comfortable, don't have heavy furniture that can't be moved, and again, don't underestimate the storage needs. So specifically, what we've done, this is level 1 of our building. There is a one level lower than this, but on level 1, what we have done to incorporate the framework that we alluded to at the beginning of the PowerPoint, focusing on safety, interrelated with connection, comfort, and choice. As you can see in the bubbles, there'll be 24/7 security, sight lines, long, well-lit halls, open areas with hallways, community kitchen, of course, as well as their individual kitchens, and staff 24/7, multiple outdoor areas, AC in all the common areas, as well as the individual units, the studio and the one bedrooms. And the other thing there at the end is wide hallways, as I mentioned before, community rooms, additional storage space. We wouldn't have incorporated nearly many of these things had we not known about trauma-informed design. Okay. Level 2-3. Level 2-3 is specifically mostly the apartments, and they're the studios and the one bedrooms, and you can see what's been incorporated there, more specifically where they're living, private units, people's access control system to their own individual heating and ventilation. Every unit has a window, a large window, so it's important that they can see outside. We're not next to any buildings, so there's good sight lines from the apartment windows as they're looking out. The building is built in an historic area. It's just off the downtown core in Halifax, so the design is actually Second Empire, and you can see it's the graphic of it was in the beginning of the PowerPoint, but it's also on the lower left-hand corner of every slide. We wanted to make sure that you sort of kept that in your mind as we were going through the PowerPoint. Private living, windows, hallways, et cetera, and controlled decorating options. So with regards to furniture, this is sort of the individual that's moving in. We recognize the fact that many of them, because they're unhoused, won't have furniture when they're moving in. So we'll be soliciting donations, et cetera, et cetera. But for those that were precariously housed or have been evicted or do have some belongings, perhaps in storage, they will have the ability certainly to take those into their units. What we do have as well is at the lower level is a steam room. So, and we think that was an important function because whether it's coaches, mattresses, et cetera, we will give the individual the opportunity and suggest very strongly that these be utilized because it will minimize bug infestations, that sort of thing. So we thought that was an important component. We had done that, though, before we knew a lot about trauma-informed design. So, yeah. So overall, folks, if they're experiencing trauma-informed design, obviously, the positives will be that I mean, these are physical things. They could potentially have lower blood pressure. It would strengthen their immune system, mood improvement, stress reduction, of course, and that all leads to increased, sociability and improved cognitive performance. They'll enjoy life more, and it'll counteract, without trauma-informed design, you're going to have things like the negative impacts of disruptive sounds, lack of security for themselves and for their belongings, lack of exits, blind turns, an uncontrollable environment, which increases their stress level, and of course the institutional triggers. Okay. So Not only do you have to be aware of what's happening with trauma-informed design on the inside of the building, you do have to pay attention to the exterior as well. And I'm going to let Philippe take over and talk, give you a few points about why it's important to include these concepts on the exterior.
I mean, it's essentially the same idea. You want people to feel like they are in a space that's safe and that that's free from stigma. And externally, you don't want it to turn into a shelter or a clinic. You want it to look like a regular house. You want it to feel like a regular house. So that's why we built in a lot of these, all these tree lines. There is a barbecue space. The EV charging is not for cars. No Teslas involved. We're talking about bikes because that's an important part of transportation. The landscape is built and thought out in order to make it feel like your own backyard and make it feel like you want to be outside and enjoying the space. It was also important to keep the historical perspective. You saw the picture of sort of gives you a sense of what that's going to look like. But there's the stones that are used or repurposed from old buildings and brought into this construction. So it truly feels like a continuation and an opportunity for people to establish and build a community where they live. Can I show that? Oh, and one more point. The relationship with Hope Cottage. So Hope Cottage is our own special works in Halifax. It's a food kitchen, and so there's a direct connection to that space, which is, I think, within walking distance, and allows them to actually go and dine should they need to, where we can offer them the services. That's society supported. Did I capture everything?
Yeah, that's pretty. Just a couple of things I'd add to that is what you want to make sure, of course, is that the exterior of the building is visually appealing, that it is welcoming. So, for instance, you would want shrubs and flowers in the entrance of the building. You'd want attractive fencing from the street to the entrance of the building and an attractive walkway. So this will be welcoming the individuals. And the same thing, the common area in the back, again, as Philippe has alluded to, there would be a barbecue area. There will be like a pergola so they could go out in different kinds of weather and enjoy the outdoor space. And there would be areas where they could meet as a group or small groups or also just be out there as an individual, depending upon what their particular need is at that particular moment. So it gives them choices and it gives them empowerment, which is what this design is all about. In closing, I know I've been a little longer than what I anticipated, but hopefully what we've been able to do is advocate for TID, trauma-informed design, as a deserving and important component of building design. Everybody deserves safety, comfort, connection, and choice, the framework that we were talking about. With these things, you're going to have the tenants, the residents are going to have an increased probability of a successful transition from homelessness to housed. It's going to improve the retention and the permanency of the residents. There'll probably be less turnover. You'll have a more positive environment, of course. It'll help them heal from what they've experienced on the street. And this is really, in essence, what you're trying to do. You're trying to help them heal, to move forward with their lives. They'll take pride in ownership and in residence, which will result in personal positivity, self-actualization, and a better life experience. So I want you to remember that this type of design has a really large impact, and it can mitigate and even heal when the environment is intentional and it's created where people are given the ability to heal, connect, and thrive. You can be part of the solution if you are aware of this and you talk at an early stage with your architects, designers, and of course your residents that will be in the building. So now we do have a handout which is kind of unique. This is old school because I'm very old. So we do have a very colorful handout which clearly graphically shows all the interconnections with the various components that we talked about with connections, comfort, choice, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've got some contact information should you want some more information on TID. And we've also recognized that the folks that we've really got a lot of this information from are, I think I had it on the last slide here. So it's from the US, a lot of this information is coming out. And School Works is, yes, that's right, I can read it here. So Schoolhouse Works is one of them. Anyway, we've indicated it on the last slide. So thanks a lot for your time and attention. I hope you've learned something and that you can put it into use.
And we'll send you all an invitation to the grand opening come May 1st, I think is the timeline. So, come and join us. In Halifax.
In Halifax, yeah.
Great, thank you again. I wish that my landlord had just watched this presentation. We'll have some time for questions for all the speakers at the end, but up next is Ash from Mississauga from Elliston Community Builders.
Give me a sec as I set this up. Sorry. Let's see. Cool. Awesome. Also, I realize, can everyone hear me if I speak like this? Cool.
Remember, there's people translating, so you want to...
Oh, right. Sorry, translators. I didn't make it into the book, so no offense if you were just here for their presentation and I'm just a sweetener on top. But I'll be quick and really excited to be here and share what we've been working on. So like Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Ash with Elliston Community Builders. Show of hands, have any of you heard of Elliston? Okay, fair enough. Hopefully good things. but yeah, so as you know, we're a big, our parent company is a big construction company. But Elliston Community Builders is the smaller kind of arm or subsidiary that's focused on affordable and supportive housing development. Myself and two others actually started it 5 years ago, roughly. We saw a huge need in the space. We each had our own kind of personal experiences with how housing helped us in our personal journeys. And a lot of us worked in public-private infrastructure development, so developing hospitals, courthouses, that sort of thing. And we just saw a lot of similarities of how that infrastructure model works and how it could be leveraged to benefit the housing sector. That was kind of the thesis on which we started. A big example is, the project that these gentlemen walked through. Their organization is taking a lot of risk early on, investing a lot of capital before you have funding certainty from CMHC, the province, everyone else. In infrastructure, when we build hospitals, a lot of that is mitigated up front just through the process. So that's a little bit of what I'll talk about today. So I'll share a bit about us, just our group, who we are, where we work, and what we do. And then just two special initiatives real quick that we're working on that are kind of in progress. The first is our template design that we're developing with CMHC under the Housing Supply Challenge. And the second, oh, nice, already got claps, great. And the second is our housing as infrastructure model, again, in collaboration with CMHC and a couple municipalities, but that's really focused on trying to take the infrastructure model we use to develop healthcare and use it to develop housing. Just a quick snip of who we are and what we do. So when we started our group, we sit within Elliston Capital, which is the development and investment arm of the company. So this is the arm. In my past role, we were investing in a lot of the hospitals that you see being built across the country, supporting the financing, taking on the debt, all that sort of stuff, and then managing the design builder to develop the project. In terms of our group as Elliston Community Builders, we started out mainly as a development manager. It was a bit reactive. We were approached by a couple nonprofits in 2019, 2020 that were great operators of housing, looking to develop a big project, but didn't have the skill set, the expertise on the technical side to raise the money and also put together a design and construction process that mitigated their risk. And that's how we got involved and started. So we do work mainly as a development manager with a lot of groups, nonprofits, First Nations, and government housing providers, where we'll manage the technical and financial parts of a project. So help line up the money, run the due diligence, get through design, go through zoning, SPA, all that sort of stuff, and ultimately get you to a shovel-ready point. One important thing I'll flag as well, I mean, we are part of this broader construction company, but we are actually independent. So about half of our projects are not with Elliston as contractor at all. For the larger projects where it makes sense, some of our clients generally want Elliston to be in the picture. They want that big contractor there, that safety, security. But for a lot of smaller projects or projects where it just doesn't make sense, like we know Elliston's not going to be competitive for a 20-unit project in Sarnia, as an example, and it makes sense to then procure and find the right construction partner. And that's a function that our group will do as well, just helping procure the right partner, the right design team, and all that sort of stuff for a project. And then at the bottom right, in terms of development, so we do develop some projects ourselves. Right now, we develop more under the infrastructure model that I'll talk about later. We don't right now purchase land on a speculative basis to develop housing or anything like that. That we're looking at that down the line, but right now, under the infrastructure model, we're developing a few projects across the country. We've done a few in BC and looking to bring the model over to Ontario. I realize, I mean, on the left, the advisory stuff we do, it might be applicable. We have a lot of groups at this conference actually that have used us to help, evaluate sites. There's been a lot of, ARBO, like the CLC process that was out recently, RHI, evaluate if a project makes sense and specifically look at technical, but also how much equity would you need to put in? How much debt are you going to be borrowing? Can your organization support that? Those sorts of critical questions are things at the early stage that we can be a part of. And quite frankly, we end up shutting down probably more projects than we allow moving forward, just because sometimes it's too far of a leap. You're taking on a lot of risk. It probably doesn't make sense unless the right government programs come in place. And this is just a quick map of where we're working. Like I mentioned, we're across the country, so coast to coast to coast, and probably half of those dots are projects where Elliston is not the general contractor on the project. We're working with third-party contractors as well. So we're super excited. Our group's grown from 3 of us that started it to around 10 now, and we've been involved in a whole bunch of really great projects and advancing pretty quickly. So we're open to help get more dots on the board there and ultimately help deliver a lot more housing for those that need it. In terms of that first initiative I mentioned, so we call it base design. Essentially, what it is a template design that, actually I'll flip to the next slide here, a template design that most folks in this room, let's say for RHI as an example, or AHF funding, everyone's trying to hit the same energy target, the same accessibility requirements on a general basis. And what we found is a lot of groups are looking to build, call it 4 to 8 story buildings, generally on a multi-family sort of context. And so we just saw that there was a lot of groups that were trying to do the same thing kind of concurrently, and there must be a way to develop something template that can work to minimize those upfront costs and that upfront risk to housing providers, because ultimately, to get a lot of the funding, you need to get to, call it a Class B level or 60% design. That's going to cost $500,000 to $1 million to get to. Our goal with this ultimately is to have a template design that really cuts that cost in half or even more, ideally. So the idea is it'll hit all those CMHC requirements, allow a lot of early stage certainty, and then lower that upfront cost, that upfront schedule that's so critical. Because we've seen that upfront piece kill a lot of projects that are ultimately viable, sites that make a lot of sense, but it's really hard to invest that type of money without no greater financing certainty. And so this is meant to help accelerate that, lower that barrier ultimately to design. And I mentioned the housing supply challenge just because this is something we've been working on over the past 5 years ourselves. We did apply for the last round of the housing supply challenge. We were successful, and so we are waiting. We advanced through the last round, and we've reapplied and waiting there again. But we're pretty excited if we can get through. We think that this is something that is going to be quite huge to help really accelerate projects and get more projects off the ground ultimately, and then lead to more supply. In terms of what we're thinking about from like a business model perspective with this, it's going to be an independent licensable template is how we envision it. So taken as an example, if a housing provider comes to us and wants to license this design from us, you would license it at a cost that would be less than if you were to develop from scratch yourself. You then could use that design and go to your design team or your project team. There's no obligation to use us. There's no obligation to use Elliston to build it, none of that. But you go out to your design team, and ultimately it empowers you, because you can go to your design team and say, I know this design meets 25% better than 2015 NECB. design team draft this design, already know it works. You're not designing, and then ultimately, when you procure quotes or you get your consultant work for that early stage, it's going to come in less than expected. That's basically the business premise, and we want it to be independent, licensable. We're still working through, if we set this up in another entity, in a nonprofit itself, or CIC or something like that. But we do think this is quite a good tool that we think will be useful, especially having seen the projects that we've seen across the country. I'll flip through a couple images. So we've developed this so far to a schematic design context for southwestern and a bit of northern Ontario. So it's still in progress, it's still in development, and I was really attentive for this last presentation because those are the types of things that in the last phase we talked to 50 plus housing providers, different nonprofits and First Nation groups. We want to make sure that what we're putting together has the optionality that makes the most sense and is also informed by ultimately the people living there. We don't want to just make steel boxes that look ugly and super cheap, but then ultimately no one wants to live in them. We want to make this something that's informed and also informs you and educates everyone on, okay, what is the cost benefit of wider hallways, of multiple points of access, of more windows, that sort of thing. A big one that we always get as an example is the energy efficiency alongside accessibility. What is the most efficient way to hit some of those targets? But if you didn't want to go for those higher standards, what is the additional cost for those? And that's something we want to kind of standardize and explore through this so everyone has a really good understanding. Because I think right now, if you were to ask different folks, you'll get different answers for each of those standards. So what you see on screen, they're just exterior renderings of the front and back. The idea of this is that you can expand, contract it, and then make it go up or down between, call it 3 to 10 stories, based on your site restrictions. So you can really fit it to whatever site you have. The exterior, the colors and all that are also all adjustable. We have a couple of materials that we vetted and priced out to say, okay, these, hardy board, steel panel, ACM, those all work. So there's a couple different iterations of how you could make this look so that you could still personalize it so it looks like your building, but still using kind of the standard palette of materials. This is just an example of the ground floor. And again, that not modular, but modular type of thinking in terms of how to develop a project. So there's a bit of that flexibility in the floor plate. So you can expand and contract this. Okay. Water bottle?
No, it's asking.
Okay. So the idea here is that it is interchangeable. You can change the unit mix based on your building and the tenant needs that you're looking to serve. So, more families equals more 2s and 3s. Something focused on, call it veterans or singles, more studio units. But the idea is, you could also, on this ground floor, if you want a bigger community room, then the bottom left 1-bedroom units, you could just change that into your community room and then replace and mix around all the unit types that you have. And that's kind of the intent here. And we're trying to pre-design each unit type so that there's some certainty there. Flip to the next one. And these are just some outlines of schematic designs of the interiors of the units that we're exploring now. This is an important one. So right now, most of you are probably applying for AHF funding on your projects. There's 2 ways to hit the accessibility requirement in AHF. One is universal design, which is what we have here. So that means every unit has the turning radiuses, age in place as possible. It allows for people to, as their mobility decreases, they can still use the unit, install handlebars, all that sort of stuff. But then the other option is to just have 20% of units accessible, so sized like this, but then 80% non-accessible units. And what that effectively does is, when you go back to this square, call it, if this is the accessible design, that second option that can still achieve the AHF requirements would probably have, 80% of this floor plate would basically shrink and you save some GCA. So we've done some math on that, and that's the type of optionality we want to explore and arm housing providers with, saying, okay, if you don't want to go universal design, you could save 4.5% to 5% of GCA and ultimately costs. And that's pretty material when most of these projects, there's always a gap on equity and you're always trying to minimize how much equity you're investing. Other things we're exploring as well. In this one here, you'll see in-suite laundry. But again, like we saw in the previous project, most of the projects that I've worked on across Canada, most groups are using common ground floor laundry rooms with a Coinomatic or someone else that's operating it. And so there's a cost differential, basically, having in-suite laundry versus not. And that's the type of stuff we want to include in our tool that you could toggle with and understand, okay, what is the cost to adding that feature? And then a couple interior renderings of our units, just to get you a sense of where we're at. This is still in development, and with the challenge, what we're proposing is developing further in Ontario and then expanding it to the rest of the country. There's a whole bunch of really interesting stuff happening across the country as well with building design. If there's anyone here from BC, they just greenlit the single egress change to code. So what that means is, even in the previous project, here you have, the typical 2 stairwells, an elevator core in the middle, and every building ends up looking the same, right? You just have a row of units. With single egress, you can just have 1 stairwell down the middle for a building up to 6 stories and have the units kind of go around. It allows for a lot of interesting designs that haven't really been explored too much in Canada yet, but can really drive up your efficiency. By efficiency, I mean your net leasable area to your total gross construction square foot. So for the same amount of GCA, you can fit more units in, which is a huge benefit. Some of the studies we've done, and there's a lot of good material on the web on design studies that people have done in terms of, if you do that, how much higher can you drive your efficiency? And you could probably add a couple, maybe 5 or 10 more units on like a 50 to 60 unit context sort of building. It's still being explored in Ontario. I think the City of Toronto is doing a study on it right now, but that's one where, again, when we're trying to make a template design, those are the things we're trying to think about, where if that's going to change soon, how are we future-proofing and coming up with the best design that can fit within that code constraint? I'll pause there. I think, with this, we're really looking at that decentralized function. I probably sped through a bunch of this, so please pepper me with questions after. But our idea is, if we're successful and continue to develop this product, we want this to be sort of an independent piece. So if you would go on our website, there'd be something called base design. You click into it, we'd have a tool that you could work with, and then if it makes sense for your project, we'd have something independent and licensable that you could just take and you could run with and procure your own design team and kind of move forward with the project there. And we think this could be a really good tool in the toolbox of housing providers. I'll ask how I'm doing on time, because I don't see anything here. Okay, let me know if I'm going too far. I'll speak real quickly on the second initiative that we're doing, which I mentioned before, is housing as infrastructure. So again, our thesis here was, if housing is a human right, then why aren't we delivering it like we do healthcare? And our team has delivered billions of dollars in hospitals over the last 10 years that I've been at Elliston, and we wanted to see if we can replicate that in the housing space. These might be a little bit stale, some of these numbers, but ultimately it's a story that, actually you guys are all the experts and probably know better than I. In order to, if you take that CMHC housing supply report, right now, across all housing types and market and non-market, Canada produces, call it like 200 to 250,000 homes a year. If we want to hit the level of affordability that we want by 2030, there's been different numbers put out, but you basically have to triple that to like 750,000 homes. And what our thesis is basically, I don't think the market sector can ramp up that quickly without some massive change in economics, but also with the current way a lot of the programs are structured, they're really dependent on the balance sheet of nonprofits, and I don't think there's enough nonprofits with enough capital out there to triple our housing supply in the next 6 years. So where do we go from there? And I'll mention this as well. We did a quick study just to further this point of looking at countries that had housing as a human right, and this may have changed. You guys might even probably know better than I, but when we looked at it, it was at the time that Elliston was actually looking at developing an affordable housing project in Ireland that was going under an infrastructure model. And it was one of those things where it's like, why are we looking at Ireland to develop housing when we have so much need domestically? If the model is there, not just Elliston, PCL, Birds, like all of our competitors and colleagues in our space would actually enter this space to deliver product. But the ultimate part of this slide that I wanted to highlight was just that part in red and the blue graph in the bottom right. When you look at our proportion of publicly owned rental housing, we have basically 10% of all rentals is publicly owned. But if you look at Ireland, Netherlands, it's basically inverse. They have a lot more publicly owned rental housing. So these are units under OCH or TCHC or Peel Region Housing, that sort of thing. And that's what our infrastructure model is really focused on. It's for those larger government housing providers. How can they deliver more stock so that we can get closer to that ratio there, where we're obviously behind with some of our comparator countries, many of the Commonwealth countries. And this is when we looked at, okay, if this, call it the infrastructure model, where is it being used and where is it not? Countries like Australia, Ireland, the UK, they do use like a design, build, finance, maintain model or DBF model to deliver their projects. And we wanted to explore how we could implement that here, taking what we know in hospital development. And where we kind of landed was what we call HAI, or housing as infrastructure. That's in between real estate and public asset development. So when we develop a hospital, we're directly contracted with the Ministry of Health. There's a certainty, our counterparty is a government authority. We invest all the capital and design, build, and finance it basically, and take all that risk on. And then the government would take us out at the end of the project. On the right side, you have real estate, where it kind of flipped on its head. It's a bit of the Wild West. You buy the land at the best price you can. You put the project together and the pro forma together the best you can. If it makes sense on the return, then you go forward and develop. And depending on the market environment, you may or may not go for a number of years. Where we tried to land in the middle with housing as infrastructure is take some of the principles of real estate development, but also some of the principles on the left in public asset development, and come up with a model where it reduces the risk ultimately for housing providers. So we're trying to do turnkey, fixed price, fixed schedule. There's no risk to the housing providers, and a big part of it is you're not investing during construction. Only once the product is, like the building's fully finished and handed over to your satisfaction, is when you would take us out. So you're only investing your equity once you're finished the project, as opposed to right now where you may invest $10-20 million into a $50, $100 million project during construction. During that time, you have interest rate risk and all those sorts of things before you can take out debt and then kind of deliver the project. So we're trying to eliminate that risk for housing providers ultimately. And this just kind of highlights some of those pieces as well in terms of what we're trying to achieve with this model. So it's really a turnkey model where similar to a hospital, the private partner is the one that's developing on their own dime and design, construction, and construction financing the project. And only once it's successfully delivered are they taken out, and then the project's handed over to the operator, and then off they go. I wanted to bring up a couple, example projects that can give some context to what I mean. This isn't exactly a design, build, finance, which is what we're kind of proposing under the infrastructure model that we're working on. But these were the 3 RHI projects in the City of London. I think we're one of the few groups that successfully delivered each project in each round on time and on budget. But the idea here is similar to what we're trying to achieve. The public sector does what it does best, so it gets the land. It can take care of those rezoning processes that are really uncertain early on and can delay projects for a while. We get through those and have sites that are ready to go. We can then come in and do what we do best, which is design, construction, and construction financing, or in this case, just design build on a turnkey basis. We do our process, deliver the project successfully, and then it gets handed over to an operator to run the project thereafter. And that's something where you could say a true public-private partnership, basically, where we're doing what we do best and they're doing what they do best. With these 3 projects, we're really happy with how we were able to deliver them. There were a couple lessons learned. I think with the one in the middle, Thompson Road, that was one where we delivered it for the city, but the operator was brought on after the fact. And so there were some changes that needed to be made after the building was completed to make sure it worked for the tenants that were going to be in there. And that's something that we've taken to heart, and we always want to make sure that our design always includes someone who can represent the end user to make sure that it's actually solving a need. And it's not just housing in units for units' sake, if that makes sense, because we don't want to depersonalize it. This project in BC is actually emblematic of what we've done. So we've done a few with BC Housing, where it's a turnkey design, build, finance. We contracted directly with BC Housing. Basically, before we put a shovel in the ground, we all agreed, hey, it's going to be $15 million as an example for the design, construction, and we're going to finance it with debt and equity. And as long as we successfully complete it on this time, by this time and at this cost, then you would take us out, and then BC Housing would run with the project thereafter. And so that was a model that we found successful. And it also allowed them to leverage their assets a bit more to say, okay, can we concurrently develop multiple sites at the same time? Which is ultimately what we're trying to do with our HAI model. It's saying if a city, as an example, had multiple sites, publicly owned, that were ready to go with zoning, we could work directly, us or whoever our comparators are, whoever the private sector entity is, develop a design that works for all those sites, meets the needs of those tenants, and then concurrently develop multiple sites at once under one package, if that makes sense. Which we think is a really good way to scale development, which I think is missing right now because a lot of it is site-by-site specific developments, which it's the same amount of effort, but you can probably 5x your output. And this last slide here, just to provide that comparison. So this was that project in Ireland that I mentioned we were looking at. So in Ireland and the UK, they do use the DBFM model to deliver their housing, so an availability-based model where the private sector design, builds, and finances the project, and then gets paid back over 20 or 30 years through an availability payment where they just maintain the homes, but they don't lease them. And so it's all related to just the buildings themselves, making sure they're operational. And then the public sector, once that happens, is the one that's basically paying those availability payments, but then has the freedom to lease those units up to whichever tenant group they're looking to serve. So Ireland's done 5 bundles so far for projects similar to what we're trying to do here in Canada. And there's a couple other examples in Australia and the UK as well that are using this model. So this is how we develop hospitals here in Ontario as well, as an example, and that's kind of what we're trying to implement with our initiative here. So, go ahead. Sorry. Oh, yeah. The lady in the front. Yeah. So the question was, what do these projects look like after the operating term is finished, generally speaking? So I'll say in the UK, I know there's been a lot of backlash for some of the hospital assets where the contracts weren't well structured, I'd say, so the private sector handed back a pretty crappy looking building, but it was in line with the PSOS or the output specs that they were provided. In Ontario, in my experience with some of the hospitals that Elliston has been running now for, our first one was in 2003, so we're at the 21-year mark. A lot of them, those PAs are pretty prescriptive in how we have to maintain them, so they have to be handed back in basically the same condition that we developed them in. Right now, they're all still fully functioning and everything else, but the intent is, to learn from past mistakes, especially in other jurisdictions, so we have that benefit. But right now, there haven't been, like the Ireland projects are still fairly recent, like the ones that are up here, only a couple years old. But I'll pause there. So that's our big idea, and I probably jumped around a whole bunch of different thoughts while I was presenting, so please pepper me with questions or catch me after as well if you want me to just walk through a bit more of what I was speaking to here. But really appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak to this group. I'm quite flattered we have standing room only, so thanks again for the time. I'll hand it back to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask questions to go up to the mic over there so that we can have those recorded for the virtual viewers. Can you just make sure that it's working? He's holding his finger up there. Now it's working, yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name's Gary Gladstone, Stakeholder Relations at RENA, helping those with developmental disabilities. So first of all, the trauma-informed design, congratulations. We opened up a group home for exceptional behavior challenges, a 7-person group home about 8 years ago, designed specifically with this in mind. Medication went down from a daily usage to about nothing in 5 years. So just unbelievable stuff that this can do. In terms of Elliston, we need more. There's no question. And the designs that I can use, we're doing something with Serotiny, who's also from the CMHC Supply Challenge, and we've designed now templates with accessibility and affordability built in for modular and interchangeable parts inside to really bring down the cost, and particularly when other partners are interested in building at the same time. So well done.
Great.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, do you want to go up to the mic?
So with your trauma-informed design, what supports are available for your residents experiencing impacts on their cognitive abilities and capacity for independent care?
Did the translators get the question?
I think so, yeah. It's just a bit quiet.
Yes. Did the translators get the question? Is that a yes? Sort of. Okay.
What supports are available for your residents experiencing impacts on their cognitive abilities and capacities for independent care?
Right. Okay, so the service provider, as I alluded to before, will be the North End Community Health Center, and they'll be the one developing the resources. We do have, again, the names will come, the residents will come from the by name list, and we're not really at the point now, we're not doing it correctly with regards to trauma-informed design, because remember I said one of the key components is to be able to allow the residents to have a say, to give them a sense of empowerment. We are doing it ass backwards because we only found out about it before we were already almost in the building and the design was able to be tweaked somewhat, and we had to be cognizant of the amount of money that was going to take for the redesign because we only had so much money to play with. It's a $15 million project, actually 17. St. Vincent de Paul donated the land valued at $2.5 million. So that was our big contribution, as well as we secured the other funding for it for the 15. But I mean, I'm not really capable of answering that question because the residents haven't been selected yet. But I'm saying don't make the same mistakes we made through our lived experience. That, if anything, is my message. If you are in any way involved in the development and the building of supportive permanent housing, make sure there is a discussion with all the parties that need to be there for trauma-informed design from the get-go. Yeah, early. Yeah, so I appreciate the question. Sorry I can't answer it any more than that. But there will be capacity, and there certainly will be lots of wraparound services. As far as the acuity of the individuals that will be moving in, that again will be up to the North End Community Health Center, because we don't have the expertise in that area to determine who will be a good fit, who is most likely to succeed in that environment. We're building it, and we know they will come because there's many to come. Yes.
Sorry, I just lost my marker. It's up here. Lots of questions.
While this lady is looking, and no problem, I just want to make sure that if you can, although it's online, we already submitted it, but if you want the handout, beautiful, full color, and with contact information. So again, we'll have some copies here on the table, and if that's what you want to do, please grab one on your way out. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for this presentation. That's so helpful to what we're doing. Building housing, so co-ops have extended some of their parking lots, and this is exactly the sorts of design that we need, right? So I live in a co-op in Toronto. One thing I'm interested in is, on the small scale, would these buildings have internet access available, paid for? Second
Great question. Yes, we're including that. There will be, the provider has already been selected, and of course that has to be done in the early stages of construction with the wiring and all of that, or the wireless. And also they'll be able to have hookups for cable TV, et cetera, in the units. Yeah. And
accessible design. I noticed with both of your presentations, there's this option of 25% or a percentage of the units. And from my research and understanding is it's an equal cost if we did all of the units as universal design.
And that's a really good point, because in the kitchen areas and in the bathroom areas, they can be modified quite easily. That was part of the design. So if we have in excess of 25% units needed for accessibility, we have the capability, without a large capital outlay, to redesign kitchen areas so that they're wheelchair accessible, et cetera, et cetera. So there is some of that, but it is, you're right. And I think part of this is because the funding that we received through the Rapid Housing Initiative Fund, part of it was contingent on you have a specific percentage that's available. Yeah, I think that wasn't my area of expertise in developing and what was going to go in and what the criteria were.
So it's fully accessible?
Well, the hallways, the common areas are fully accessible. 25% of the units, some studio, the breakdown is between the studio and the one bedroom. 25% of them will be fully accessible with modification. I'm not answering your question.
The definition for me is if the unit is fully accessible, not just guest-friendly.
25% will be fully accessible.
So that's every room and all aspects.
25% of the
Color,
38 individual apartments will be fully accessible.
And that's colors and sound and everything.
I'm talking about mobility issues here and specifically.
So
Yeah,
there's the definition piece that's important.
yeah,
So I might want to think about it.
sure. Okay, I
Thank you so
appreciate your
much.
comments.
And,
Thank you.
I guess that's it for me.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Sorry. I work for a nonprofit in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and we were working on getting a motel and redoing it for these units. That project is going sideways, so now we're looking at a rebuild, so this is really informative, and thank you for that. Just an observation, though, on the first one. The parking lot is really huge. Has there been an assessment on that need? And can that space be used for something else? Like
Yeah, it's
public
going to be
gardens or
repurposed
something?
because we acknowledge that the parking lot is not going to be for residents by and large because they'll be using public transportation. That was one of the reasons why the location is quite good. And in addition, we're going to have an accessibility bus available to tenants. That's another side thing we're hoping to provide because it's important to do that for folks with mobility issues. And there is, for folks with the electric chairs or chairs that need to be charged as well as other mobility devices, we have internal storage spaces for them. We have two in the ground level where they can come into the inside of the building and leave their units there and recharge them, et cetera, et cetera. So those are some of the things we're doing to enhance the quality of life for people with mobility issues within the project.
Thank you for the presentations.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
I'm glad that these two presentations were together. It feels like there's a good fit here. I do just have a question for you, Ash, around what the Canadian Alliance might be able to do to support this. Like, the data is so clear that we are so far from what we need in terms of supply, especially at the lower end of the level. Like, is there any policy advocacy or any kind of other thing that we can do to support more of this type of building happening?
Oh man, we've been doing a lot of advocacy. So we've been chatting with at all levels. We recently had a chat with Ontario, MMH, and OBA, and then CMHC and the feds as well. So with the HAI, like the housing as infrastructure, like developing at scale, how can you develop multiple sites concurrently in a model that is competitive and marketable? There's been a lot of discussion. There's a lot of material out there. We'd love your help, quite honestly, in terms of finding the right people, because I think we're also constrained by our circle and who we know and that sort of thing. But we have plenty of examples, plenty of projects that we can point to where it's been working and some ideas on how we can get it done. So
Awesome. Let's do one last question and then, cool. two last questions. Okay.
My question is to Alice Don, and regarding to the units that you built in London, I'm just wondering what was like the cost of the construction?
Yeah, in London, I mean, and that's, I think to the point earlier too on, what's the cost premium for accessibility and that sort of thing. I think what you find in the design or development space, everyone's kind of like, oh yeah, like $350 a square foot or $280, but you don't know if someone's talking about just hard costs plus your construction manager's fee, all in development costs, like your total pro forma, including land and financing and that sort of thing. I don't know if I can actually share, high level, each project was, I think it was around, call it 50 million for all three projects, roughly speaking. I don't know if I can actually share the cost per unit, given that it was a city project, but it was roughly there. In the city of London or in southwestern Ontario, I'll put out there on a design build, so a turnkey basis, you're looking, at least what we're seeing, anywhere between, call it 380 to 430 a square foot, I'd say. Even as high as 450 in some cases, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Don't quote me on that. That's me speaking. Or you can. It might not mean much, but yeah, exactly. Recorded.
Hi, I'm Janice. I'm from Halifax, but working in Rocky Mountain House in Alberta. In the women's shelter there, I just want to say that trauma-informed is not old school like the paper, and just want to really thank you for that. We built a huge women's shelter that wasn't informed by those elements, nor the stakeholders that have actually the experience in a women's shelter. And so lots of errors were made. So getting it early, getting it up front, and the cost to adjust and recreate or actually go in and totally redesign are very, very high after the fact. So thank you, and thanks for sharing. I had also a question about what does Ozanam place mean, the meaning of the name, and look forward to more Ellis Dawn projects in Alberta. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
I'll take that on. Ozanam, you might have seen his name in the very first slide. He is the founder of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. He created it when he was a 20-year-old Sorbonne University student in Paris, and realized that the church wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, and he, as a devout Catholic, felt like it was important for him to go and visit people and deliver hope in their environment. And so everything we talked about earlier about home being a connection and hope being essential is what this society is all based on and built upon from his vision back in 1833. So
Okay.
That's why we
After
felt that was
St.
important
Vincent,
calling
you
that.
mean, after St. Vincent.
Oh yeah, well Saint Vincent is the patron saint, but Ozanam is the lay person who created the organization.
Great. Thank you all. Let's give a round of applause for our presenters.